Oil tankers have become the Kremlin's weapon.
Potentially catastrophic.
This could catastrophically affect our economy.
The target is internet cables, gas pipelines and power lines at the bottom of the Baltic Sea.
It's part of hybrid warfare.
Underwater communications are being torn apart by anchors over and over again.
No one believes these cables were disrupted by accident.
The Kremlin is intensifying its hybrid attacks on NATO and is preparing for a full-scale invasion.
Possible military conflict with NATO in Europe in the coming decades.
Sabotage on EU military facilities. Russia jamming the GPS signal. And then there's espionage using covert equipment installed on oil tankers. How did Russia's shadow fleet become a threat to the Baltic region? Why are these tankers called a ticking bomb? And is the Kremlin preparing for war with the North Atlantic Alliance? Watch in the special report, Hybrid Wars, how Putin uses the shadow fleet in sabotage against NATO. This is a tanker of the Russian shadow fleet, Eagle Ass. At the end of December last year, it was sailing through the Gulf of Finland. Suddenly, it slowed down, dropped anchor, and cut the Escalation 2 underwater cable, which supplies electricity from Finland to Estonia. Then went on and severed 4 more internet lines. Eagle Ass was about to cut other cables and pipelines. It was already approaching the Baltic Connector undersea gas pipe. The only reason it survived is because the tanker was stopped by Finnish authorities. They arrested it. It's now docked near Helsinki. The crew is suspected of sabotage.
An investigation is underway. We're interrogating 9 crew members. They are suspect. They are banned from leaving the country.
One of the anchors of Eagle Ass is missing. It was torn off. Finnish law enforcers and the Navy pulled it up from the bottom and recorded traces of dragging in his area. The Finnish president called the damage of the cables an attack on underwater communications.
We will keep acting decisively when critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea is at risk.
The Eagle Ass incident is just one of many cases of tankers damaging underwater communications. At the end of January this year, a fiber optic cable that connects Latvia to Sweden was broken in the Baltic Sea.
We have a transmission failure on an undersea cable.
The Latvian Prime Minister said it was the result of external influence. The Swedish State Security Service called the incident a sabotage and started an investigation. The ship, which was suspected of breaking the cable, was detained. However, they did not say which one. And yet another tanker of the Russian Shadow Fleet, which is suspected of sabotage, the Chinese cargo ship Yipeng 3, with a Russian captain, which was sailing from the Russian port of Ust-Uluga. On November 18th last year, it severed an undersea cable between Finland and Germany, an important information mainline linking data centers in northern and central Europe. And a day earlier, on November 17th, the same tanker damaged another undersea data line between Sweden and Lithuania. Internet access in Lithuania was reduced by a third. It could be sabotage, like the previous incidents, Germany's leadership said.
This is part of Russia's hybrid strategy aimed at threatening European countries. No one believes that these cables were accidentally broken, that it was anchors that happened to be over these cables.
These are definitely not accidents, according to experienced ship captains.
On my ship, that could never happen. The anchor is secured by 3 systems. All 3 of these systems must be misused for it to fall.
And it's certainly impossible to accidentally drop an anchor and have it hit an undersea cable directly.
They had an echo sounder or some kind of underwater observation device. They just saw they were in the bottom and started lifting the anchor back and forth. It's like a guillotine falling. That's a lot of mass there. So the anchor hitting the cable can cause a break like that.
Якоря, кабель может возникнуть такой просто разрыв.
Critical infrastructure facilities between NATO countries have become deliberate targets. And there have been many such cases. Earlier this year, a cable between Latvia and the Swedish island of Gotland was severed. A month before that, the line between Finland and Sweden was damaged just as well. And in October 2023, the new polar bear, which was traveling from Russia's Kaliningrad to St. Petersburg, damaged the underwater Baltic connector pipeline with an anchor, of course. It took 6 months to repair the pipeline. The repair cost amounting to about 35 million euros. The countries of the Baltic region also have to spend a lot of time and effort and money to restore other communications that have been the object of sabotage. But this might be just the beginning. This is what a map of underwater fiber optic cables, gas and electric lines on the Baltic Sea bottom looks like. Even before the full-scale war in Ukraine, British Marshal Stuart Peach warned that Russia was about to attack the underwater infrastructure of NATO countries.
Where those cables are cut.
When these cables are cut, it could potentially have a catastrophic effect on both our economy and our way of life.
The fears seem to be coming true, which is increasingly worrying the leadership of the Baltic Sea region countries and ordinary citizens, such as these residents of the Estonian village of Kiasmu.
The situation will get even worse. The Russians will not calm down. They want to cut us off from the world. We're witnessing a war that is happening very close to us.
And the word war may not be an exaggeration at all. The Russian Shadow Fleet sometimes acts as a cover for the Russian military, for example the tanker Eagle S, which severed an electric cable between Finland and Estonia, turned out to be Russian reconnaissance ship. This was discovered by investigative journalists from the British shipping publication Lloyd's List.
We have had reports from credible...
We have information from credible sources that there was spy equipment on the ships that was used to monitor NATO activities in the region.
Surveil...
The Russians used this equipment to track NATO naval ships and aircraft. Records of all radio intercepts were unloaded in Russian ports for analysis, and the equipment was loaded back there again.
The equipment was transported in very large suitcases. They also had laptops with Russian keyboards.
The same spy equipment, according to the publication sources, was on at least one other vessel in the Russian Shadow Fleet, the tanker Swift Sea Rider. In total, the Russian Shadow Fleet includes about 600 tankers. Many of them are transporting oil to evade sanctions from the Russian port of Ust-Luga through the Baltic Sea. In fact, the Kremlin is turning it into a passageway for its smugglers, saboteurs and spies. And all this is in the center of Europe. After another undersea cable was damaged earlier this year, the countries of the Baltic Sea region held a NATO summit in Finland to agree on how to strengthen critical infrastructure protection.
The Baltic states are prepared for emergency situations.
The summit decided to protect undersea communications with the help of new NATO mission in the region. It is called the Baltic Guardian.
There will be a range of assets, including frigates and maritime patrol aircraft. We will do everything we can fight back. Our adversaries need to know that.
A fleet of surface drones is also being deployed in the Baltic Sea. Space surveillance is also being conducted.
We are supported by satellites in addition to marine patrol aircraft and drones. This is a major NATO operation. We can also use sonar to detect any damage on the sea bottom. We check ships that are passing by, whether they have any anomalies, and we start asking them questions.
By ROVs.
All of this will help improve surveillance in the Baltic Sea and immediately detect attempted sabotage.
Ship captains must realize that potential threats to our infrastructure will have consequences, including boarding, confiscation and arrest.
And Olaf Scholz said that because of the growing threat, the German Navy will provide its ships to protect the infrastructure of the Baltic Sea. According to Politico, the EU is preparing for large-scale detentions of Russian tankers in the Baltic Sea. And the reason for this may be environmental violations. For its shadow fleet, Russia buys ships in poor technical condition. The service life of which has come to an end, it would not be a pity to lose them in case of any trouble.
What the Russian Federation uses resembles a pile of rusty scrap metal more than high-tech vessels. And at any moment, any of these boats can go down.
Quite recently, 2 Russian tankers have already gone down in the Baltic Sea. This is the result of a fuel oil spill from the Volga-Neft tankers. But if the accident happens in the Baltic Sea, the scale of the ecological disaster will be much bigger. After all, there are ships sailing here, each of which carries many times more oil products than Volga-Neft. And the Baltic region has already been on the verge of such a catastrophe many times. Earlier this year, a tanker of the Russian shadow fleet, Aventine, became out of control due to a breakdown. It had to be towed away. And there were about 100,000 tons of oil on board.
And these 100,000 tons of food products alone, plus it's an out-of-control bomb that's been carried into the shore, well, it's really scary. And there have already been 3 cases in the last month only and a half. Obviously, something has to be done.
Before that, there was an accident on the tanker of the shadow fleet of the RF Canis Power due to the engine failure. And in early February, explosions in the engine room occurred on the tanker Koala. The vessel was in the Russian port of Ust-Uluga. It contained 130,000 tons of fuel oil. Finnish authorities sent petrol airplanes to the accident area. This time, they did not find any oil spillage, but this cannot go on forever.
If nothing is done, it's really a matter of time as to when and on what scale a massive oil spill will happen. At this point, the whole world is just lucky that there hasn't been a massive oil spill yet.
It is a ticking time bomb. That's what European environmentalists are saying.
We could end up with an environmental catastrophe, the consequences of which will take decades up to clean.
The notorious Eagle-Ass tanker, the same one that was arrested for damaging underwater cables, also posed huge environmental risks. The Finnish authorities found more than 30 faults and stated that the tanker was simply no longer seaworthy. And according to investigative journalists, one of the reasons for this is the spy equipment that was on board.
This equipment consumed so much electricity that it caused frequent power outages on the ships. Of course, it is very dangerous from an environmental point of view, considering that such ships carry tens of thousands of tons of oil.
Putin is shamelessly using a rusty fleet of tankers. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock is outraged. We must join forces and put an end to Russia's shadow fleet, declares Olaf Scholz. Leaders of other countries in the Baltic region say the same thing.
We need to close the Baltic Sea to the shadow fleet through sanctions, through particular measures and within the framework of international law.
Europe is preparing a large-scale operation for this purpose, reports Politico. The Danish authorities have announced they will start inspecting tankers that may pose a danger to the environment and navigation. Previously, Denmark never did this. It seems that there is an obstacle. Countries are obliged to adhere to international legislation on free navigation, but there are absolutely legitimate reasons to stop tankers. In the Danish Straits and in the Gulf of Finland, there are narrow sections there that are territorial waters of EU countries.
It will block Russia's passage out of the Gulf of Finland. Such inspection can take place there 100% of the time, both at the exit and entrance. This can be used very actively. And by the way, Denmark and Finland, Estonia, they can invite other EU and NATO countries to help.
There are at least 2 legitimate reasons for not letting the ships pass through. That's an improper technical condition and lack of international insurance. Both are just about the Russian shadow fleet. In addition, tankers will become much more difficult to use for sabotage. It is not yet known when EU countries will start inspecting Russian ships and how exactly they will do it. The Europeans are assessing the pros and cons and looking for the legal mechanisms. And the Kremlin is closely watching their reaction. If this reaction is weak, if the tankers of the Shadow Fleet continue to be allowed to sail uncontrolled through the Baltic Sea, sabotage may become even more frequent and vice versa.
The Kremlin regime understands force. Therefore, the tougher and decisive the response of the Western countries is, the less likely it is that a new conflict zone will emerge.
Putin is trying out the NATO countries. He's looking for weaknesses. Earlier this year, the Russian vessel Yantar near the coast of Great Britain collected data on the country's underwater infrastructure. The British publication The Sun reported that Yantar is equipped with modern low-profile submarines capable of cutting underwater communications at a depth of up to 6,000 meters. The United Kingdom's defense minister called the incident an act of aggression and publicly addressed the Kremlin dictator directly from parliament.
HMS Tyne, and I also want
I want Putin to hear my message. We see you. We know what you are doing, and we will not hesitate to answer you.
We will not shy away.
The Kremlin is waging a hybrid war against NATO. And cutting off underwater cables is only a small component of this war. Commander of the German Navy Jan Karg said in early February saboteurs damaged German warships. Russia is also jamming GPS signals for NATO military aircraft and also for passenger airliners. For example, last April, the Finnish airline Finnair had to cancel flights from Helsinki to the Estonian city of Tartu for almost a month, because due to signal jamming, navigation devices simply did not work. And there were also arson and explosions at military plants in various parts of Europe.
Hybrid warfare means sabotage, means cyber attacks. Hybrid warfare has also manifested itself in attempted assassination attacks, damage to critical infrastructure. The alliance will not accept this. We will fight back.
NATO faces enormous challenges. Russia has created a secret department for sabotage and assassination throughout Europe. This was reported by an American magazine, The Wall Street Journal, with reference to representatives of Western intelligence. This department is based at the headquarters of Russian military intelligence.
Its operations included assassination attempts, sabotage and conspiracy to install incendiary devices in airplanes.
Danish Defense Ministry intelligence warns that Russia could launch a full-scale war against NATO within the next 5 years. However, the Russian military leadership itself is also talking about this.
Potential military conflict with NATO within Europe in the next decade.
The military threat is constantly growing. Russia's spending on the army is more than the defense spending of all EU countries and the UK combined. Russia plans to concentrate 150,000 of its soldiers close to Poland and Lithuania to deploy them in Belarus. From there, they can attack EU states.
Assuming that the reaction will be rather sluggish, will not be that effective, and they will achieve their goals. Russian troops may try to unleash a front against the Baltics, against Poland, in order to expand their presence in the Baltic in another adventurous campaign.
Military experts named the Suwalki corridor between Lithuania and Poland as the Russian Federation's most likely target.
The capture of which creates a reliable land corridor between Kaliningrad and the Russian mainland, and simultaneously cuts off the Baltic states from a land corridor with their NATO allies.
European countries need to prepare for war. That is the only way to lower the probability of it. The less strong the EU is, the more likely Russia will attack it. Europeans should dramatically increase defense spending, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte urges.
Because otherwise we'll have the money, but we won't be able to protect ourselves. We need to do that. Plus, we need to make sure that Ukraine will gain the upper hand in the war.
It is Ukrainian resistance, the huge losses the AFU inflicts on the Russian army every day that prevent Putin from launching a hot war on EU territory. They constrain his resources. That is why the Kremlin has so far limited itself to hybrid attacks. If we do not fight back Putin's tankers, if we show indecision, we will have to fight back Putin's tanks later. The Kremlin perceives weakness as an excuse for further aggression. Whether the hybrid war against Europe develops into full-scale war depends largely on the EU countries and the NATO bloc. Their readiness to respond toughly to hybrid attacks to strengthen their defense. If you want peace, prepare for war. Now these words are more relevant than ever for the citizens of the European Union who are used to a peaceful life and well-being. Maxim Ulapov, Special Report.